A lot of things happen in life that you don't fully understand while you're living through them. At the time, you just survive it. You go to work, handle problems, pay bills, take care of people, and somewhere in all of that, you change quietly. I think a lot of men over 50 know exactly what I mean when I say that. Because by this age, you stop seeing life through theories. Now you see it through experience. You've watched things fall apart you thought would last forever. You've put your heart into people that didn't love you the same way back. You've learned some hard truths the slow way. And one of the biggest things that changes is the beliefs you used to carry. Not overnight, but life just slowly wears them down. And honestly, you know, I think some of that is necessary because some beliefs help you survive when you're younger, but eventually they stop matching reality. One of the biggest ones, that's if you work hard enough, life eventually balances out. Most of us were raised on that idea. Do the right thing, work hard, stay loyal, keep pushing, and eventually it pays off. And look, hard work does matter. I still believe that. But what life teaches you eventually is effort and outcome are not always connected the way we thought they were. Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. You can be loyal and still get betrayed. You can give years of your life to something or someone and still just to watch it all fall apart. A marriage, a business, your health, even your peace. And when you're younger, you keep thinking, if I just work harder, maybe I can fix it. But after enough years and enough disappointment, enough nights laying awake trying to make sense of things, you realize life is not handing out fair rewards based on effort. And that realization changes a man, not because he becomes bitter, but, because he finally stops trying to control outcomes he was never fully in control of to begin with. And there's freedom in that. You stop asking, what do I get back? And start asking, can I still respect the man I am while I'm doing this? And that changes everything. Another thing a lot of men quietly realize is that peace never came from the things he thought it would. A lot of us spent years thinking the next thing was finally going to make us okay. The next paycheck, maybe a promotion or, the next relationship, the divorce finally being over, retirement, the kids being okay. Just one more thing to survive. But eventually you realize you've been surviving for so long that you forgot how to actually live. If you've been on this channel for a while, you already know I learned a lot of this the hard way. I've talked before about starting over, walking away from unhealthy relationships, trying to rebuild your life when everything feels broken. And one thing I realized through all of it is you can change your environment and still carry the same heaviness inside you. Because some things don't get solved just by leaving. Sometimes your body leaves, but your mind is still stuck in survival mode. I remember sitting in my truck one night. Everything finally quiet around me and realizing I didn't even know how to relax anymore. My nervous system had been stuck in brace for impact for so many years that it started feeling normal. And I think a lot of men understand that exact feeling more than they'll admit. Especially men our age. A lot of us survived by staying busy. That's how we coped. Work harder, push through, handle it. Don't sit still too long. Because as long as you stayed moving, you didn't have to feel everything that was underneath. And for a long time, that works. Until, life slows down enough for the silence to catch up with you. And now, all those things that you outran for years, they're still sitting there waiting on you. And the grief, the anger, the loneliness, the exhaustion, the anxiety you buried underneath survival mode. Nobody really teaches men how to deal with those things. Most of us were just taught how to endure them. And that's where a lot of men quietly break inside. Not out loud, not dramatically, just slowly. And maybe the hardest realization of all is understanding that being a good man does not guarantee that you'll be valued. A lot of men grew up believing that if you showed up for people, stayed loyal, worked hard, helped carry the load, that people would appreciate that. And sometimes they do, but sometimes people just get used to your presence. Your sacrifices become expected, and your effort just becomes normal. And one day you wake up realizing that you've been pouring into people for years while slowly emptying yourself. Not because you wanted praise, you just wanted to feel like you mattered too. And I think a lot of men carry that pain quietly, you know, especially older men. But here's what I finally realized: clarity is not bitterness. There's a difference. Bitterness keeps giving while secretly keeping score. Clarity says, I'm allowed to stop pouring myself into places that only value what I provide. That's not anger, that's self respect. And honestly, I think a lot of men over 50 are finally reaching that point. They're not becoming cold, not becoming selfish, just finally understanding that their peace matters too. And honestly, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you probably realize that's really what a lot of my videos have been about, all along, just piece by piece. Through my own story, my own mistakes, my own hard lessons, my own rebuilding, all of it. Whether I was talking about anxiety, starting over later in life, toxic relationships, survival mode, dating, or, just trying to find peace after years of chaos. It all keeps leading back to the same thing. And it's, learning that your peace has value too. And maybe that sounds obvious to some people, but for a lot of men our age, that realization comes late. Because we spent most of our lives, behaving or believing that our value came from what we could carry, what we could fix, what we could provide, how much pain we could absorb without breaking. And eventually, you realize you could spend your whole life being strong for everyone else while completely abandoning yourself. I think that's why so many men hit this season of life and suddenly start wanting something different. It's not fame, not chaos, not proving themselves anymore. Just peace, real peace. And maybe for the first time, not feeling guilty for needing it. Thank you.